Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavoston, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which I say definitely count, including that 1995 one that's not even an annual.
Wow, we're just lighting up with the controversial greatest hits, Dan. Well,
Yeah, I gotta start strong, Mark.
You got to start strong. I'm the mischievous one, Mark Ginocchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, including the negative issues, and those count. The annuals don't, especially that 95 one. But anyway, like, what are we doing here? Like, it counts if it counts in your heart. Like, isn't that what Available Alan said? I don't know, whatever. But we're here and we're about to do a show, I think.
Yeah, so on that point, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors argue about annuals, but also uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for another of our review episodes of the Amazing Spider Talk.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review to help spread the word about our show.
This podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keep this podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and consider joining our Patreon, where all the episodes of our upcoming Season 6 have already started going up several weeks early, including interviews with some of our favorite Spider-Man creators. But today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 24. This issue is written by Zeb Wells. The interior and cover pencils, which are quite awesome, are by John Romita Jr., with inks by Scott Hanna, colors by Marcio Menyz, and of course, letters by our favorite VC's Joe Caramagna. This issue was first released on April 19th, 2023. Mark, why don't you take us through what happens in this issue?
Absolutely, Dan. I'm in a new comfy setup here, which is just going to make my recaps even more illustrious than they usually are, okay? So I'm raising the stakes. All right, the Baxter Building. 1 year ago. Maybe. Well, past midnight, at least. Or well past midnight. You know, punctuation matters, right? Anyway, Ben Grimm is getting a stack. He calls himself a genius, but he just pulls a fully made hero out of the fridge. And I gotta think, unless Reed has invented some kind of polymer that prevents bread from getting stale while it's sitting in the fridge for hours on end, how smart could Ben actually be here? Plus, he's already got tomato on this pre-made hero. It's like sliced thin, like it's gonna be making the bread soggy. It's soggy tomato bread, and that's stale. That's been in the fridge for a couple of hours. This scene is really upsetting me, Dan. And I just don't get...
Calm yourself. It'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Right.
He's the thing. He's made of rocks. How great could his taste buds be?
I guess so, but he says he's a genius. Anyway, Ben hears some racket, and it's Reed and Sue looking so lovely. Superhero marriages, am I right? But wait, the racket can't be from them because they just got in. It's Spider-Man stealing the mini fusion reactor, Natch. Reed wants to know, why didn't he just ask? So Peter does, and Reed says, well, it's dangerous. And somehow, somewhere, someone is still criticizing this arc because all Spider-Man is supposed to do is ask his friends for help. Anyway, Johnny flames on to stop this madness, but he gets a little too hot and either incinerates Spider-Man or Spidey escapes. Reed, noticing that there is no corpse, bets the latter and torches on the case. Peter goes incognito on the New York City subway and arrives at Norman's warehouse in Jersey City, and I'm wondering what kind of subway technology Peter brought back with himself from Rabin's dimension, right? I mean, okay, look, I get that he probably took the subway to the PATH train, but like, we don't see any of that here, and I'm making a joke. So before you transit nerds come after me on Twitter, I'm just being funny, or not, whatever. Anyway, there's also a shadowy, long-haired figure watching Peter and Norman as they do this whole thing. Peter gets to the warehouse, and Norman reveals a very futuristic spider suit, and then he drops some exposition about all the other tech Peter has been borrowing from superheroes. And Peter pushes Norman to send him now, despite a lack of testing. Some might call this mission Operation Warp Speed. Am I right? Thanks, Trump. Anyway, the equipment is rocking and rolling, and then we learn that the shadowy figure is actually Miss Marvel. And since this isn't a mafia movie, we have to guess that's how she ends up working for Oscorp rather than getting dumped into the ocean for witnessing an interdimensional crime. We get some really trippy art here from JRJR, and Rabin's face appears like he's Mufasa himself, and in his best James Earl Jones voice tells Peter, "You travel to your death. I slaughter you when you arrive." How was that, Dan? Was that a good Mufasa or
I think
Darth
it's probably
Vader?
best we keep going with this recap.
Okay, anyway, so Peter arrives, and he's standing over Paul and MJ with the Blade of Decay, and Paul looks like he's having a day, while MJ must be coming from an audition of First Blood given the bandana. It's really cool that she's still a working actress, even in other dimensions where time moves faster. Peter goes on the attack, and Rabin starts to taunt him, only to hear a small voice before getting impaled by his own blade. Paul mentions the kids, and Peter and MJ have a moment before MJ starts to turn around because he's been gone a long time. A lot has changed, and look, I'm sure nothing actually important happened here, Dan. Should we just end the recap and get into our review?
I mean, there's a strong case for doing just that, but maybe we should just actually say what's on the page.
All right, so Paul brings out the kids. Peter asks, "Who are they?" And MJ says, "They're my family." And everyone, everywhere, had a normal one. The end.
Absolutely nobody lost their minds over something that I think is like weird. Just to be honest, like Twitter lost it over this, and I don't really get it. Like, we knew about this from issue 1. Why
Right.
is this still a something that like we're acting like is melting our brains 23 issues and a year later? Anyway, cliffhangers in comics, suspenseful, unexpected. Am I right? Never been done before in the history of a comic.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember a comic a couple of years ago that ended with MJ looking like she died in an explosion caused by Kindred and Norman Osborn, and like the very first page of the next comic, she was very much alive. So, you know, like comics, maybe, right?
Yeah. We'll get into all of that stuff later in the episode, but I think to start this, you know, a lot of this this arc has been, I think, satisfyingly closing in the gaps between, you know, where we are now in the future with issue 1 and what happened during that time period, that year or 6 months or year and a half or whatever it is, you know, that occurred. Luckily, the recap page doesn't talk about time in this issue, so we don't have to scold editorial and their confusing time stuff for this issue. But I think this is, like, for me at least, I thought this was another satisfying, you know, chapter of like what happened. I don't think there were a ton of truly shocking things in this that we couldn't have surmised based on context, you know, of the previous issues in this run. So in that regard, I thought this was a kind of like, you know, not quite as substantial as the previous chapters and as emotionally compelling, but still some really cool stuff. And just to start it off, Mark, I think we should ask ourselves every issue, is this what Peter did? Is building this suit with Norman and blasting himself to this other dimension, is this what Peter did? Do you feel emotionally satisfied that perhaps this is the moment that the marketing was pushing us to? I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to this. Do you feel like it is?
Well, I mean, that's just it, Dan. I mean, I don't have an answer for you. I mean, what did Peter do? I mean, like, steal some stuff? We kind of knew that's what Peter did. Like,
yeah.
Like, I feel like, I guess, and before I like try to answer your question seriously, I mean, just to kind of, you know, address what you said, and you know, just before that, I mean, like, you know, in terms of like my overall impressions here of this comic, I mean, I think, you know, I enjoyed this comic. I still feel like this storyline is moving in a very interesting direction, but I do feel like, you know, compared to the first 3 issues of this arc, you know, to your point, like, I feel like we learned the least in this comic. And I think that there were opportunities to learn more things that were not we didn't really get to see, and we could address some of the specifics of what I'm talking about as the review moves along. But like, it did kind of, I don't want to say sour me. It didn't sour me, but like I feel like with less substance here, it's kind of hard to, get a real sense of like, well, now we know more, because we don't. Like, is this what Peter did? We still don't know. Like, like I feel like you got to the end of this comic, and again, not to always kind of equivocate all of my opinions versus what I'm seeing online about this comic, but like, one of the things I saw from several people was like, that they feel like they had answers about things, whether it be, what did Peter do, or the kids and Paul and MJ and their relationship. And I'm just like, if you read the text and just see the things that happened on the page, we don't know. Like all really we can do with this comic is make inferences and conclusions based on what we either are speculating is happening or how we are emotionally reacting to what's happening. So no, I can't. I honestly can't answer your question about is this what Peter did, because I don't feel like he did anything that significant that we already didn't establish that he did many months ago in this comic book.
Yeah, the only reason I would like mount a case that this is maybe one of those big reveals is that yes, we can infer a lot of this stuff here. Like obviously he would have to return to Xibalba at some point and save MJ, and we can make that connection because we know that he works with Norman in some way and steals FF tech, and here we see him doing exactly that. It's just a lot of these elements are the very things that this book has been cagey about. Up to this point, it's like we know that he worked with Norman, but they've been very clear to not tell us on what, and right. Here we see exactly the what of that, right? We know that Kamala is working with Norman. We don't know why, and here we get our first real glimpse into what that is. We see Norman building spider suits. How did that start? Here we get the kind of answer to that, We don't know what he stole from the FF. We get the answer to that. I feel like a lot of this was inferred, but like it's also been the kind of stuff they've been most cagey about since issue 1 kind of comes in here.
I guess maybe the reason why I'm being a little more non-committal about it than you are is this is like, okay, we learn more about the what, but to my other point, like I kind of had a sense of what the what was. I still want to know the why, because I think the why is more important than the what here. Like not to sound like Kindred. It's not who I am. It's or how I am or whatever. but you know what I mean. Like I and I think this is also where this comic let me down a little bit. Is that I think part of the emotional stakes of the initial question that was never actually posited in this comic, but was posited in the marketing for this comic, which is what did Peter do? The fact that you saw him aligned with Norman Osborn, and yes, we saw in the last issue, like, he's ready to put Norman through a wall, and then, but then he went to Norman because he realized he was the only one, quote unquote, willing to help. But like, I still feel like there is an emotional journey there to, what would bring Peter to the doorstep of his arch nemesis, who has, caused more misery in his life than any other character. And, it's not saying that I don't believe that Peter would make that move, because I do. But I want to see more of it. I think there's story to be told there, and maybe we will still get that. We have 2 double-sized issues coming up. We might get that story, but I feel like this was the opportunity chronologically to do that, and to get more into like the emotional level of what did Peter do, because I feel like, seeing that process for him and that journey for him to go from aligning himself with Norman Osborn, I think raises the stakes of whatever this thing that Peter did is just so nefarious. Like, yes, he's stealing from his friends and all that kind of stuff. That's not great. I understand that. But like, I think, we're all seeing this from Peter's perspective, and it's kind of like, of course he's doing this because he's trying to get back to MJ, like it doesn't feel that nefarious to me. But like, maybe there is something nefarious about how he got himself to align with Norman, and Norman convinced him, well, you got to get this from Tony and you got to get this from Reed. And you know what I mean? Like there's meat on that bone there that we're not getting a taste of. So it kind of like leaves this story a little flat for me. The story within this specific comic a little flat for me.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. And, not to be that guy again, but I am that guy. Like the solicit for this very issue, like the advertisement for it was that you would be questioning by the end of the issue, who is the hero and who is the villain. And I don't think that this issue seemed particularly interested in that question. Like,
right.
At least from my perspective, I don't doubt Peter's actions at all. Or that they are actions that are logical to the character of Peter. And I'm sure we can talk about this later when we talk about that alignment with Norman Osborn in more detail. But, I just don't question his actions in this. It seems very much in keeping with the character to me. And so I didn't see that solicited question answered here. And the reason I bring up the solicit at all is to say, like, in crafting that solicit, it means that was a question that was on the mind of the creator
right.
in the creation of the story arc. And so I hope we get more of that, but I'm with you that I don't think this issue fully invests itself entirely in, it's not as interested in the mindset of Peter than it is in the, like, what exactly is going on beat to beat in here. There are a couple of, like, for all the questions that it answers, there's still a bunch of, like, lingering questions that I think are out there. For example, it's very clear in this issue, Norman lays out that Peter only has the tech enough to do one more jump and send himself and one other person back through the portal to return to the 616 universe. And then that, begs the question, well, how did Paul and the kids get back where we see them in the present day? Some other thing is bound to happen, whether Paul creates another spider device or whatever in the time that Peter's been away. That seems fairly convenient. My guess is that there's something else going on there, because then there's a whole other question of, like, here Paul clearly knows that Peter is Spider-Man. Whether he has a concept for what Spider-Man is or isn't is another thing entirely. We don't know how long Paul has been in this dimension, or even if Paul is a member, denizen of the 616 primarily. But it seems like in present day, Paul doesn't know that Peter is Spider-Man. At least it hasn't been brought up. Like, he comes to check in on Peter like he's just a normal dude. So it suggests some kind of, like, mind wipe or something like that is occurring. So I don't think that the kind of, like, mechanics of Peter's return to the 616 is, like, truly we've seen the whole story there just yet.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, my understanding, and again, I could be reading the text wrong, was, and I'm referring to whatever issue it was several months ago, might have been like during the Hobgoblin arc. I mean, like, there was some kind of line put in there about, like, when like, the inference I got was that, like, MJ was dead and Norman helped bring her back to life. So I feel like there's still more about to happen in these next two issues that's going to, I think, really color the question of what did Peter do and why is this so questionable as a decision that he made. You know what I mean? Like,
the exact wording in that comic is that MJ was lost. And I think at the time we thought maybe that meant dead, but now it's been cleared up. Yeah.
No, you're right. And that I was searching for what the original word. So lost could be in time. I understand that. So but to echo your point, I still feel like there are things that have to happen or should be happening in these next two comics that I think, like, I don't know, like, when you posit a question, what did Peter do, and, like, kind of show what you have shown so far throughout this comic, like, I as, even as someone who relates to and identifies with Peter, I'm fully anticipating having a moment over the course of this arc where Peter does something that just makes me go, oh, Peter, like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, and I haven't had that yet. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
everything feels very like aligned and justified with Team Peter, even if other people aren't understanding what he's doing in the moment. You're like, no, he's still being a hero right now. But like, I'm still waiting on the thing he does that makes him not a hero. And maybe the villain, as this solicit that I did not read insinuates. But we didn't get it here for certain.
Yeah, and so moving on from one question to another, like for me, this was the kind of like first moment. Like I think over the issues we've talked about, I've been much more kind of like in line with the mumbo jumbo, the mystical mumbo jumbo of this arc than you have. You know, like the thing I've always been saying is the mumbo jumbo doesn't really matter. It's the stakes, the immediate stakes for Peter and his friends and family. And I think the book has done a really good job of like, look, it's all the, you know, compared this to like a Hickman comic, you know, the mumbo jumbo takes the forefront there, you know, and
Right.
like, and you're meant to understand it. And here, if you don't understand it, I don't think you're missing out on much. Like it is from Peter's very grounded New York City perspective, you know, he is just a person on board this ship, and he's doing whatever he can to survive and keep the people close to him safe. This was the first comic where I felt like I was truly out of the loop on what was happening in the comic in a way that I didn't like. And that's not to say that like it's not intentional, like that we're still not meant to be kept at an arm's length. Because there's like a great moment where Rabin is stabbed, and you know, he says all this mumbo jumbo as he's being stabbed, and Paul is just like, whatever, like it works for me, like you're dead and that's good enough for me, like that kind of like makes fun of all the mumbo jumbo of Rabin and all of his math and stuff like that. But there's just a lot of competing things going on in this comic. Like Rabin's motives are kind of all over the place. Like when Peter's blasting through space, he says that he like wants to die so that he can become a god. But then when Peter shows up, he doesn't really seem interested in that. Like he's interested in killing MJ, and only in death does he kind of change his mind. Like there's just a lot of weird stuff going on, and I felt like really alienated by it. And again, like I'm willing to admit that that's intentional. And, you know, and I just like am flagging, like, I hope we're not supposed to be understanding what's going on here. How did you feel reading all this?
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly it's as you acknowledge. I think it's just more of the same for me. I mean, like this is like you said, this is probably like my least favorite aspect of this story is this kind of like very cosmic-y kind of mythology behind it. That's driving the action here. But I do agree with you that I don't feel it's an like. Yes, it's happening, and I guess understanding it or being on board with it is certainly, you know, it's not a bad thing to as a reader. But like, I also, like you said, like we've been getting so much from Peter's point of view, and like that sense of desperation and drive from him that like it you know, like that's at the heart of this book, not like Rabin's ceremony here. But so, which is just a long-winded way of saying like I didn't find this comic specifically to cross a line in any way, the way you kind of are insinuating, like that would have like made me feel less engaged. Like I think like I'm just not engaging with this storyline no matter what. And I mean, I agree with everything you said, so it's not like oh no, it was fine for me. It was I you know what I mean? Like it's just like I'm just like no. I mean it was like, you know, if we're grading things on an engagement level, for me it disengaged me just as much as it did 2 issues ago when I was making all of the everything everywhere all at once jokes during the recap. So, you know, it's just kind of like, all right, you know, like he's dead, he's not dead, he's a god, he's not a god, he's in the sky, he's not. I mean, like speculate if you will, but this is all just kind of like whatever to me. Like what's happening between Peter and MJ and Paul and the kids, you know, we still don't know. So
I think for me it's just that like the stakes are less clear. Like last time we saw Rabin, the stakes were very clear. If he kills Spider-Man, he disrupts whatever cycle and gets to become a god. And here, like, it's not even about Spider-Man. It's like, I got to kill Mary Jane. I got to kill myself. I'm like, okay, like, just choose one and stick with it,
Right.
And that's the thing. But I do have some suspicion, like that this will end up making sense. Like when Peter is traveling like through dimensions, we see this like cosmic Rabin, like this. He almost looks like, oh my God, why am I forgetting the name of the god of like the
eternity or
he looks like eternity. My guess is that is like him post death, because we know Wyeb, his god power, he exists outside of time. Like we even saw him fight Peter that way with his like opening portals and punching him from the past or whatever it was, so my guess is that like Peter is seeing a Rabin that is already outside of time, and post death he is coming to Peter and saying he's foreseen his death is what unlocks his ability to connect to Wyeb, and perhaps even to return in the present day, is that like he has unlocked himself from time in dying, which he says as much, like he had become Rabin or Wyeb in mind but not in body, and it was the death of his physical body that unlocks him to travel wherever he wants, and I think that's what we're seeing when Peter is traveling through space. Is it kind of like all over the place? Yeah, but I do have a feeling that it will make sense ultimately. Especially because like his death seems deliberately to be a bit of an anticlimax. Like if this was meant to be truly the death of Rabin in any real way, like it's a really small moment. Even JR does not play it up visually. Like it's a little bit visually confused, and like Paul, I guess, stabs him in the back. It's not a big moment. What do you think of this still small voice that comes through to him? Do you have any theories on that? I mean, it's a very specific thing.
I mean, honestly, and again, like with so much unanswered, despite some professing of answers, it really is up to, I think, the reader to infer and speculate here. I mean, my brain went to something with the children, and I know we're seeing the children there, but like we still do not understand who are these children and where are they from. And I know not to get into the sausage making here, but we're going to talk a little bit about some theories in the second half of this episode. But the fact of the matter is, like I feel like Small Voice had something to do with the children. That was my read of it. Like that was where my brain went.
Yeah, me too. And I think that's obviously, I think that they want you to think, and it seems like the logical conclusion. And it's to say, I don't think the nature of these kids is what we think it is. Like there is something else going on here that we're going to find out in the next two issues. All right, that seems like a good enough breaking point to talk about our Slack. So Mark, take it away.
Well, absolutely. Hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. Dan, what's been happening in the Slack this week?
Yeah, Mark, this week in the Slack has been kind of an awesome celebration of many of our Slackers getting key comics for their collection. We have a whole collecting channel, and people sell books there and share things that they've been doing with their collections. But it's kind of cool. Our editor, Alex Galucki, who I'm sure will put a picture of this in the video version of the show, he picked up an Amazing Spider-Man #2 for his collection, which is a really big issue. And even our listener, Z, who gave me the T-shirt that I wore a couple episodes ago, picked up an Amazing Spider-Man #1. And they both shared those experiences on there. And even, Jeff, who's been a longtime listener and supporter of our show, he picked up, original art from this very run of JRJR's work and shared it on there. So it's just cool. A lot of shared love over the Slackers' growth of their collections and unique memorabilia that they have. And people love sharing that stuff in the collections channel there on the Slack. So
have you shared your copy of ASM -1 yet, Dan?
I have not, because it's still coming in the mail, Mark. I'm
okay.
still waiting on it.
Okay,
so,
got it.
Yeah. So anyway, come join in on the fun. Come join our amazing Slack. There's a link in the description of this episode that'll let you sign up in less than a minute. So with that, let's get back to our review of Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 24.
So, Dan, talk to me about the Fantastic Four sequence. It seems like you're a fan.
I am a fan, Mark. I thought this was a really fun, like, aside in this comic. You know, like, nice to mix in some comedy here and there. Like, the stuff with the Thing. First of all, John Romita Jr. kills it on drawing the Thing. And I would definitely read an FF Spidey team-up book from Wells. I think he has the voices down really perfectly. You know, there's a little bit of Silver Age-iness in this that, like, makes it fun, and I kind of associate with any kind of reading of the Fantastic Four. And I just like reading Zeb Wells with this tone of comic of, you know, and just, like, even if it was a flashback, I like seeing Peter on the run and kind of up against other heroes, doing his own thing, like, in a misconstrued way. It took me all the way back to Amazing Spider-Man #1, and I just thought this was a really fun sequence.
But I don't understand, Dan. What I keep hearing is that people think Peter is acting out of character here. What do you think about that?
I don't think so at all. I think this is completely in character for Peter. I mean, yes, to your point, everybody seems to be deliberately missing that he asked for permission, well, after the fact, but they also aren't going to allow him it then. You know, this is a person who is desperate and desperately doing what he needs. And I think this is very in keeping with him, like all the way back in Amazing Fantasy 15. Like, the character, yes, you could say he changed by the end of that story, but in that story, he invites his peers to join him at the science exhibit. And when they tell him no, he scorns them immediately and continues to do his own thing. Like, Peter has always been the type of character to push aside loved ones, whether that's Mary Jane or Gwen Stacy or his Aunt May, because of his own stubborn determination to do what he thinks is right. And in this instance, he's very clear on what he thinks is right. He needs to save MJ, and no one is going to get in his way. And that's what makes the character so interesting, is there's a very real road to put Spider-Man on the path to becoming a villain, which again gets back to that solicit I mentioned earlier, is like, he is someone who has a rugged determination behind him that you could see going the wrong way. And we may very well reach the end of this arc and realize what Peter did was a massive mistake. You know, like, in his determination, he did something that he's likely going to regret, whether that's working with Norman or going to another dimension or messing with space-time continuum. I don't know. This is very Peter Parker to me. You, Mark?
Yeah, look, like, again, I hate to keep framing the debate around some of the criticism that I'm seeing in pockets around, you know, the online communities. But the fact of the matter is, like, you know, having quote unquote growth as a character doesn't mean that all of that character's previous characteristics, specifically the flaws and the fallible ones, just disappear completely from the character. Like, you are allowed to grow and improve and still make the same mistakes, because that's what humans do. And that's, you know, like, yes, we're reading about a superhero and a comic book character, but, you know, I've always felt that the appeal of Peter Parker is the fact that he is so relatable, and he is the everyman, and he is someone that you can see. You know, like, you could see anybody kind of walking into that role because of just how generically relatable he is as a person, as his fallibility. So, you know, yes, we you know, like you said, at the end of Amazing Fantasy 15, things happen and he's changed, but, like, we've seen continually over the years, whether it be in the Ditko era, the Romita era, the DeFalco era, the Stern era, the Michelini era, on and on and on, Peter having these moments of emotional regression because he's either acting impulsively, or his determination is getting the best of him, or he's making he's making a snap decision and it's the wrong one, like it's part of the canon of this character. I said recently, Peter is someone who routinely makes mistakes and has to own up to them. And I had several people being like, what are you talking about? Peter doesn't make mistakes. That's not what the character is about at all. And I'm like, okay, well then I guess we're just reading about the character differently. You know what I mean? Like that's because that's always how I've interpreted this, whether it's Uncle Ben or Gwen Stacy or Captain Stacy or, and on and on and on and on. I mean, like it's just part of the core of the character.
It's just the Crusher Hogan story writ large here. The stakes are different, but or the size of it is different, but the stakes are the same and the character decisions are the same. And that's what makes, beyond all of that, even if there's growth, that's what makes the character fun to read. I want to read the fun version of this character is the one that makes mistakes. Like a perfect Peter Parker is just inherently less fun to read.
And it's just, like I said, it's also unrealistic, which is a funny thing to say when you're also reading about a character jumping dimensions and having spider powers and, fighting gods. But, again, that is what has been Marvel's calling card for over 60 years, is the fact that these are everyday heroes. So even the Fantastic Four dynamic, they're the first family of Marvel, and yes, they have lives and they're together and they're moving on, and yet the Thing 60 plus years later is still eating sandwiches in his bathrobe while it's like you said, it's what makes it fun. So I don't understand why why we're dismissing an entire storyline because we are just some people are just determined to say, well, this isn't the character. It's I feel like, hey, maybe it's not a version of the character that you like or that you relate to, but I have not seen anything in both in this comic and elsewhere during this arc that has felt like has not reflected some version of Peter Parker that I've seen in this comic book over the last 60 years. So I really want to kind of move forward and past that as a criticism here in terms of the characterization. I don't see anything that's far off the reservation here. So.
Well, I'll also add that, I think it's really great to see this in a book like this because, so many of the Marvel titles now have really lost what I think is the original appeal of Marvel, which is that it's relatable characters. They anybody could be them, or they live in a world that you recognize. The idea of secret identities is almost entirely gone from this universe. Most of these characters are operating well beyond their initial place of starting. They're not fighting the same battles that they used to fight. In the comics, and that changes run to run. The Hulk is cosmic now. Everything has been elevated so much over the years. It's not to say they're not enjoyable, but the fact that we've got a book with Spider-Man in it where we're still mining drama from the Norman Osborn of it all, and real drama from that, I find honestly refreshing. We're still operating in those realms, even if we are dealing with some grand mysticism and dimension hopping. I'm refreshed that Spider-Man feels like it's still interested in the things that made it popular in the first place, which is to say a flawed character at the center of it. Anyway, talking about working with Norman Osborn, I thought that was a really fun part of this story. Yeah, it's not quite as deep as I think you wanted, but first of all, JRJR's visuals of the new suit and all the mechanics of popping the spider into the chest and all of that stuff is really cool. And there's some great dialogue here. Norman's like, "Thank you for trusting me in this," and Peter's like, "I don't." And that stuff is what makes this drama between the characters so fun. Is it is an inherently fraught, connection there, and you can feel the stakes of it. You know, when he says like just do it, you know, half the time I'm expecting it to just turn New Jersey into a crater. You know, you know. So,
Right.
like I thought that whole sequence, even before we got to the trippy dimension hopping stuff, was really a great deal of fun.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you know, like there were, it's funny. There were aspects of reading this book where I almost like didn't recognize the art as J.R.R., but then when I look more closely at it, I'm like, oh no, it's his style is certainly there, but like I definitely feel like this book was pushing him in angles that I don't know, well, certainly not in a Spider-Man book that we've ever seen from him before, you know? Like so you know, it was just the art in this whole book was a tremendous amount. I mean, like, look, I am an unapologetic fan of John Romita Jr., so it's going to take a lot for me to kind of turn my opinion on him there. So,
well, it just seems like he's having fun, you know,
Yeah.
and I think you can see it on the page. I think the page that we're, you know, probably just shadow referring to is like spaghetti Spider-Man, if you
Right.
will, like him being just stretched, you know, to pieces. Like, but what I love about that is it's still, as cool as that visual is, it's still very like aligned with the story as it's being told. Like it's very mathematical. You can see the grid lines and the way that it's done, but also looks like a web, you know, as he's going through it. And like one of the things I commended this writing for doing is like selling me on Spider-Verse in the background, that like, oh, it's the magic and math are one and the same thing. I mentioned the Thor connection a few episodes ago. But here you can literally see it. Like it looks like strained, you know, quantum graphing, but it also looks like a web. And it's like that theme that we got all the way back to JMS, which is like, is it science or is it mysticism? And here you can see the literal, like one visual sells me on all of that. And I just think, wow, what a triumph. Like if you can sell one of the biggest skeptics of the comic Spider-Verse on this concept, you know, with a single visual, this was it. You know, What a cool way to put it. I'm sure you had an equally jaw-dropping experience with that page, yeah?
Oh, 100%. Yes. So Dan, we alluded earlier to the fact that you know, elements of the ending were a little anticlimactic and kind of like, well, that happened. But why don't we talk about the Peter, Paul, and Mary Jane of it all, which, you know, is, I'm sure, totally unintentional, right? In terms of what is happening here, you know, like, because obviously this is the sequence that kind of broke the internet again. So I'm curious to get both your thoughts on it, and you know, I am feeling even generous enough to let you speculate a bit, Dan. So how do you like them apples?
Oh wow, well I'm very reluctant to speculate publicly, like, you know, like it's privately going on, but like I feel like every time I put myself out there I end up looking like a fool, but I did want to, like, you know, put something out there. But first, like, this made me feel really awkward. I know the word cuck has been going around on the internet, and I hate invoking it here because, one, I think it's actually an inappropriate use of that word because it's not at all what's going on here. But, you know, Peter shows up and, you know, after the defeat of Rabin, tries to embrace Mary Jane, and she turns away from him. And I got to admit, I felt really awkward in this moment. Like, Peter puckers his lips up, and it's just like, kind of read the room. Like, whether or not, like, time has passed and she's still in love with him or whatever. They just killed, like, this dude that like, has been trying to kill them.
Like, yeah, who's been potentially, like, tormenting them for years in their time now, or however long it is.
I can understand, like, emotionally for Peter. Like, that's what makes it so awkward, is, like, emotionally for Peter, he, like, you know, loves Mary Jane and wants to go save her, and he wants to be the hero and you know, the big kiss embrace, and that gets, you know, obviously turned on its head. It just, like my gut just went, like, just, I felt really uncomfortable with the way that JR drew it. Like, it was just a very uncomfortable page, and I know intentionally so. And Mary Jane turns away from him and says, look, a lot of time has passed, a lot has changed, implying that the relationship is not quite the same, which is totally understandable given whatever the circumstances are here. I'm sure we're going to find out the exact amount of time that has passed for them. And obviously we get the page turn of the kids coming out and Mary Jane saying, quote unquote, "They're my family."
Right. Mark,
I'm curious to your reactions to reading it on the page and then your feelings henceforth.
Yeah. Well, look, I will start with, looking at what I view as the intentionality of word choice here. She doesn't say like they're like Paul and my kids, or it's the intentional word here is they're my family.
She doesn't even say they're our family,
right?
Right.
Well,
it's specific to her.
Yeah. Which this is where I'm just gonna let you go off, Dan. So get your popcorn ready. But it begs the question of like who and what these kids are. But if they are, what I will say outright, one of them physically and from the get-go physically looks exactly like Mary Jane. So there is and the boy, there have been comics where I feel he kind of looks like Peter. But then there are also comics that, there are people who think it looks like Paul. Okay, whatever. But either way, like the girl definitely looks like MJ. So it does stand to reason that these children are of some kind of genetic linkage to MJ at the very least. So they're my family, and meaning her family. You know what I mean? So like, I don't know what we can infer beyond that. Like you said, there was just a whole lot of awkward in that scene, and things that we, that have happened that we have not seen yet, that we know we're going to see. I don't read the solicitations, but frankly, from people rage tweeting about it, I've seen preview pages for the next issue. It's that for you section on Twitter just really is a game changer, Elon. So thank you for serving up rage to everyone. I know we're going to get more about that's going to explain a lot of this and what's been happening and why MJ might be reacting a certain way. I will say, regardless of how these children were created and whose DNA they have, we're not going to go all Maury Povich here, but if MJ and Paul have been stuck in another dimension for a significant period of time with two children and they have essentially been raising them, like, there's going to be a bond there, regardless of how these children came about, regardless of not if MJ cucked Peter, as one great website put in its headline. And people just got to understand that. So, because again, that's just human nature. So that's that. I think that's really all I want to say about that, Dan. I don't, it's not that I'm not trying to have fun here, but
no, totally. I'll push back and say I don't see the boy whose name I think we haven't gotten yet. It's Owen. Sorry, yeah. It's Owen. I don't see Owen as looking like Paul at all. From the get-go, he has looked like a young Peter Parker to me.
Yeah, well, I think what we are, and this is not to dismiss you because I actually agree with you, Dan, but I think what we have learned dramatically about this specific run of comics is people are going to see what they're going to see, and I think frankly what I don't want to say what they want to see, because I don't want to imply that you're jumping to a conclusion based on some kind of wish casting here, but I think that there has been a fair amount of projection going on from readers in Spider-Man for the last year or so, and I think when it comes to the identity and the genetic disposition of the children, it's more of the same. Because I had several people tell me point blank, "You're crazy. It clearly looks like Paul. Get over it." And I'm like, okay. I mean, that's what you saw. I don't see it that way.
Right. And to your point earlier, if it is Paul's child, great. Like, let's explore what that means and why we went this direction. And, hopefully they can convince me that it was the right direction to go with the character, I can be convinced of almost anything, as long as the writing is good.
I will say, I said this on Twitter, Dan, and I'll say it here for our podcast listeners as well, since I feel like a lot of the people who tend to engage with me about this stuff on Twitter don't actually listen to our podcast.
That is a certainty, Mark. Yeah.
But I will say that yes, like let's get the explanation and the reasoning and the emotional heft behind this, but I'm not going to make a prediction. I'll let you make the prediction. But like, if the answer is ultimately, well, Peter, you were gone, I was lonely, I had needs, so I slept with Paul, and these are our children, I would be grossly disappointed in that as a storyline direction. I like, just as for my personal preference. I really don't think that's what it's going to be, but I wouldn't love that as a decision. That's so
outright.
Yeah,
I don't love that either. And I think, look, not to give the critics any kind of like credit, but like I get it. Like, the book is clearly setting you up to think that MJ and Paul had these kids, right?
Right.
And so if your reaction to that is like, I don't like that. Like, I get it. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of that either, but I also have more faith in this writing team, because I think it's been earned. Maybe not necessarily an editorial, because I think, but I also think, like, if that's the direction they choose to go with it, they better have a really good answer for why that's the direction they wanted to go with it, other than we thought it would be a cool way to take the character. Cool. Like, but you're changing a monumental part of the Spider-Man mythos by, because that's not an easily undone thing, that like Mary Jane had children and went through pregnancy and all of that stuff. Like that's, I mean, we kind of tend to ignore it from the Clone Saga. Like, no one brings that up, that canonically happened. But anyway, like, I'm with you. I just don't think that that's the clean answer. And I think the book has done everything it can to, one, make you think that, but also be safe enough to not confirm it. And the people that think that they know that that's confirmed are not reading the same text that I'm reading. Like, My Family is about as vague as you could make that statement, also known as a comic book cliffhanger. Like, heaven forbid a comic leave you like uncertain about what's coming next. And again, we have to embrace that uncertainty.
We get this all the time. We think someone's dead. We think someone's angry. We think something shocking has happened. And then we're going to get we can very easily, if not the next issue, because I think the next issue is going to be almost exclusively from MJ's perspective, right? In Zabalba.
Well, we're going to get Carr Andrews is coming on the book, Spider-Man Reign fame. And he's doing the art with Wells writing a sequence of the next issue that is from MJ's perspective. I believe we're still going to see the story moving forward in that book, but also we're getting an aside that is all from MJ's perspective.
Okay, but either way, it's very possible that we may get this exact sequence again, but drawn a little differently to give you a different interpretation. You know what I mean? Like, it's so, like, someone's like, look at her look. She looks so stern, and it's like, again, like, that's comics. Like, they're baiting you here, and like, like, I know that's another criticism. It's like, oh, this Spider Office, all they want to do is spark outrage, and it's like, no, man, this is a cliffhanger. This is like, comics have been doing this for decades. Like this is part and parcel here. Like, this is nothing out of bounds here. This isn't about trying to stoke outrage. And yes, Zeb Wells in the interview, and I'm not going to be able to go to conventions. I know we're not getting into that right now, but like, that's a whole other thing. But in terms of what is on the page here, there is nothing on this page that is definitive in any direction. And yes, like you said, it is meant to lead you in that direction, but like, I've also, like, as someone who has been reading these comics for over 30 years, I'm not taking that bait. You know what I mean? Like, okay, give me that story. What's next? You know, and then I will make the judgment, because I feel like you have to in a storyline like this. Like, yes, you're allowed to judge a story, you know, an individual comic on an individual basis and how it sets up the next part of the story. But like, I don't feel like you can say, I know what happened in this arc from one part of a comic that's halfway through the arc. That's all. So there you go.
Right.
Anyway.
And I think also, like, just for me, like, you know, this ongoing run has been a very good way of, like, really assessing how you and I grade things on the show too, which is to say, like, are we enjoying it in the moment? Right. Like, it might go a direction that we're not happy with, but at the current moment, all we can say is what we're reading on the page. And I'm really enjoying what I'm getting in the moment. And my expectation is always going to have to side on this will be good until we get to the point at which it's not. Like, Kindred could have had a great end that justified all of that. It was a taller and taller and taller thing to mount, making something that would justify and clear up that. And they didn't end up doing it in the end. And there were issues in the Kindred saga that we really enjoyed, like the one with Peter in the theater, right? That was all about Kindred. And we were like, in the moment, that was really satisfying. Looking back, that was an unearned chapter in an ongoing saga, you know? You know, like, will history maybe look at these Wells books differently than we're feeling in the moment? Perhaps. But all we can talk about is what we're enjoying now. So anyway, I did want to say, like this kids thing could go multiple directions, right? It could be MJ and Paul's kids. It could also equally be that Peter and MJ slept together before she went to another dimension, and those are actually their biological kids, right? Like she was pregnant, and that just sped things up. I mean, like, to me, based on the evidence I have right now, that seems like the far more logical conclusion to make, given that the kids look like Peter and MJ.
I don't think that's what we're getting either, though. I got to be
no,
honest.
I don't know that they're twins.
Right. But I feel like there's a simplicity in she just slept with Paul because she was lonely, and there's a simplicity in she slept. You know, they're hers and Peter's kids from before they were born. So what are your other theories?
Okay, so here's a theory that I've been thinking about, and I kind of want to get it out there before we get what I imagine is next issue, the reveal on what the identity of these kids are. But like, my read on these kids has always been they're not like real people, so to speak. Like, because one, if you're going to get rid of these kids, which like seems like a high likelihood that like there's something going on here, that like we're not going to saddle MJ with kids moving forward. And I could be wrong. Like, that could be the direction they're going, right? But you can't just kill off a kid or get rid of a kid easily. It's, you know, although, you know, MJ does say earlier in the series, like, it's about responsibility, why she can't be with Peter. And that takes me back to Gail and her family in Pennsylvania. And that's kind of a nice ending to the MJ story, if there's going to be one, is that she is upholding the values that she feels in the face of what we learned about her origin story in the Ron Friends Tom DeFalco run. But anyway, there's no evidence for what I'm about to say, but I did want to get it out there too, maybe even just to calm people down, is that like, we know that the realm that Paul and MJ are in at present is one that's built on symbology, right? Like, he's got the guns that change form, you know, like, you know, we got the spider tracers. We know that like symbology is a key aspect to Paul's work, right? And Mark, I'm sure you can relate to this, as I am, you know, have always known to be true, but am experiencing currently in my life, is that like, we often talk about how in the real world, our children are a symbol of like a parent's love for each other as reflected in their kids. Like, I look at my son and I feel that way, and I see my wife, I see myself in him, I see my extended family in it, my parents, my grandparents, all their DNA show up in those kids. And, you know, it has brought us closer together. And maybe this is, you know, Daddy Dapper Dan Gavosden showing up right now and fueling this into the comic. But, you know, MJ has been away from Peter for what is probably years. Like, could it be that she materialized these kids as symbols of that love that she can protect and keep alive until the threat of Rabin is gone, or until she returns to the 616 universe? Like, you know, this comic has been so interested in the love between Peter and MJ, you know, like, what if these kids are not kids, so to speak? They are that love kept alive. Whether it means she had to move on, she was gone from Peter so long, and she found this new love with Paul, but wanted to keep that old love alive in some way and made these kids. Like, I think there's something more going on there. And also the fact that we haven't gotten a lot of characterization from these kids. Like, you know, like they could just be that, just symbols, you know?
Well, like, yeah. So I actually wanted to interject. I'm not that I'm about to speculate here, but
sure.
And I preface this by saying I have not, due to reasons, been able to read the Mary Jane and Black Cat miniseries that came from Dark Web. So if this contradicts that, I can stand down and you know, Alex and you know, everyone else, you can edit this out. But like, have we seen these kids like interact with anyone that isn't Peter and Paul? Not Peter, Paul and MJ yet? I mean,
no, we haven't. Like, it's been explicitly like not the case. Like, even when Paul and MJ are in Norman's office, we don't get an explanation about a babysitter or anything like that.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Or like when they're at the resort with, you know, and Peter's there with Felicia. Like, it's not like, oh yeah, well, we left the kids with Aunt No or whatever, or, you know.
Right.
Like,
exactly. And, you know, there's this whole idea of like performative nature around the kids. Like when like Paul asks MJ, how are you doing? She says, good. He's like, it'll have to be great. Here come the kids. You know, like there's something going on there.
Right.
You know,
and you know, when this whole arc kicked off, I mean, you know, what was one of the things, and we both kind of commented on this when we reviewed it, was, you know, Rabin shows up and it's like, you know what, Paul, you know what to do with the kids, you know what I mean? So like, yeah, there is a lot of very unanswered questions going on here that I think relates to not just the identity of these children, but the actual presence and being of these children. And I think that, you know, what you're hitting on is something that is accurate. You know, I did see something in the Slack. I'm not, it's not my speculation, but, you know, like that maybe, you know, these kids are kind of the manifestation of Wyatt being like severed in two before Peter left the dimension. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot happening here, and I think a lot of it is pointing more towards the mystical and maybe the less tangible than the, you know, MJ slept with somebody and birthed two children, you know, like, so like we gotta just kind of roll with it a little bit. And, you know, you may not,
and our critics will say like, oh, we're just saying this so that we can continue like propping up Wells and not really dealing with the reality that she did have kids. I'm okay. I don't love her having kids, but I'm okay with it if it's justified. But I also deeply don't think that that's what's going on here. Like, I think it's supported by the text.
I'm going to say, let's get the answers, because unlike some previous runs on this book, like we are in the midst of a storyline that, you know, a critical storyline that also is like, you know, seems to be answering the questions that it posited several months earlier, rather than extending it out for another go round. I mean, like, you know, I guess there's still a possibility that they won't fully answer things in the next two issues, and we will have to, you know, see what those consequences are if that's the case. But like, yeah, like either way, like when we get to the answers, then we can make a determination about whether or not we think this is a good direction for the comic book and these characters. But like, you know, when we're still operating in a realm where it can go in multiple directions, and yeah, I just don't. There is nothing from this comic that I have seen yet that has led me to the conclusion that it's going to be the more obvious answer of, you know, again, I'm not trying to be glib about it, but like, I just don't feel like MJ got knocked up by either Peter or Paul and popped two kids out in this other dimension. I have not seen anything in this comic that makes me think that is truly the obvious thing outside of some bait from the comic and how it's setting up cliffhangers. So, that's my prediction.
Yeah, and I'll to answer your earlier thing about like whether this is going to be the end of it or not. I really, really don't think we're in a last remains situation.
No,
here.
I don't either. I really don't. But I guess that option is always a possibility when the story itself is not technically done yet.
It's true because we also thought during Last Remains that was the end of the Kindred saga. So
well, we did and we didn't. I mean, we were making our predictions, and I was like, it's Harry Osborn, and it happened, and you were like, you're just right. There was like even when it happened, I was like, really? Am I right? Like it didn't feel like. So anyway, so do we want to grade this thing, Dan, or do you want?
That is behind all of this. Yeah.
Yes.
Let's get to our grades. Mark, what'd you think of this one?
I'm giving this a B. I mean, like I said, I enjoyed it, but it's probably like my least favorite installment of the arc so far. But like, I'm still completely on board with this. I mean, but like, this book didn't shine for me as much as the last two did, for certain. So,
and this one's a B+ for me. I think it was about on par with the start of this run. It's given me a lot to chew on, but yes, it's a minor entry in what I think has a potential to be an all-timer arc if it sticks the landing. Right. So we'll see. Time will tell. We're getting 3 weeks between the next two issues. In the back of this book, Nick Lowe said he wanted to give them extra time to make sure they could create masterpieces. His language, not mine. But I hope they do. Like, take those extra weeks, make sure it's great. Like, this ending needs to be solid. So I hope they can get there. And I guess, Mark, we'll find out, which means it'll be perfect time for us to kick off season 6 in those 3 week intervals. So something to look forward to. Although I think by the time most people are listening to this, season 6 has already begun. So
look at you baiting our listeners with a cliffhanger, Dan.
Well, hey, this is all to say, sign up for our Patreon so that the timeline of our recordings makes more sense. But anyway,
hold on. Let me give you a stern look. Anyway, I'm good.
Mark, why don't you take us home?
Well, of course, Dan, it is that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, everybody, this podcast exists because of listener support on the very same Patreon I was just talking about. So for $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews the same week the comics release, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. I'll also say you can get it for less than $3.99 a month if you sign up for the annual one. It's like $43 a year, which is like cheaper than getting a subscription to a comic. You can just listen to us right on time. I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. You get a lot more than just that. So anyway, thanks to everybody who already supports us and the work that we do. Plus, want to issue a special thank you and welcome our newest patrons, Daniel Thatcher, Warren Alexander, Randomize the Plot, and Alan Steinberg. And a special thanks to Dan Guidis, I'm probably butchering his name, for upgrading his membership this week.
Man, we got all those new members, and people said we were failing, Dan. That's really fascinating. Anyway, to download our earliest episodes, including interviews with legendary creators like J.M. DeMatteis, Tom DeFalco, Ron Friends, Mark Bagley, and many, many more, subscribe to our Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues podcast on Apple Podcasts.
So, Mark, until we both get spaghettified when we travel to the podcast dimension, what's our motto?
Ooh, spaghetti. That's almost as good as like a week-old sandwich in a refrigerator. Our motto, of course, is, with great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.